If you work in fintech marketing, you know that events are important, especially in B2B. But a lot of advice mainly comes down to go to Money 2020, get a booth, show up, and boom, you'll get leads. Very few people will actually tell you how to build an event strategy that ties back to revenue or tells you, how to decide which events are worth your budget, how to design experiences that people will genuinely remember. That's exactly what today's guest does for a living. Kate Young is a senior event marketing manager at Middesk, a San Francisco-based business identity platform that helps financial services companies verify, onboard, and monitor businesses with confidence. Think KYB compliance, business verification, fraud prevention. Before landing in fintech, Kate studied neuroscience, worked in the music industry, and ran events for museums. And I really think that combination of backgrounds shows in how she thinks about events. It's more than just logistics. It's really about how people experience things. So in this episode, we talk about how to build an event strategy from scratch, including how to get buy-in from leadership, how to map your events across the full funnel from awareness all the way to revenue, what to do when your budget is limited and where should you focus on first, and what makes an event genuinely memorable beyond just good content. I think this is one of our most practical episodes, so whether you're just getting started with events or trying to get more out of your current budget, I think you'll find it really helpful and interesting. Let's get into it. You're listening to the FinTech Marketing Lab podcast. I'm Araminta from Mint Studios, a content marketing agency specialized in the fintech space. And this podcast is where we experiment, explore, and break down how fintech marketing actually works in practice. Each episode, I talk with top fintech marketers about what they're testing, what they're learning, and how they're pushing the boundaries of brand, strategy, and team building. With that, let's get into today's episode. Okay, so the first question I'd love to ask is, you've got a really interesting background. So you were a neuroscience student, and then you worked in the music industry, you helped set up festivals and music events, and now you do events for tech companies. So how do you feel like that a background in music and neuroscience helps you do tech events today?
Yeah. So I think the neuroscience piece maybe goes into just being very organized. I was a really excellent student, and being able to process lots of information and keep it organized was important. We also talked in our coursework about how perception works. So how people kind of perceive content and how they parse information and how they experience visuals and sound, all of your senses. We would actually go through medically how that happens. So I think sometimes that comes into play for me when I'm designing an event. For music, I think there's an undeniable parallel in terms of the style of working in events and in music. So, for example, you are prepping towards an event date or a concert date, and you're doing a lot of teamwork and planning and practicing. And then there's an actual show that has to happen. And I think there's that performance and the little bit of a high that you get from actually being live and doing something, whether it be a concert and performing or an event day. That cycle of work towards that event day and then kind of the relief and excitement of it actually going well is consistent between those two pieces of my career. So I find that folks in events often come from creative backgrounds in that way, and I think that might be a piece of why.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then you also did events for a museum, right? Do you feel like that also helped? Because that's more of a different, I don't know, I haven't organized events for museums, but is that a different kind of style or a different target audience or different skill set?
Different audience, certainly, a fine arts kind of often patron type audience. But I think for museums, in that role, I was an event director. So I was selling events, but then also executing lots of them for external clients and internal clients. I think what was really educational about working in a museum was the care and curation of space, right? So literally, they have curators to guide people through a physical space and guide that experience, educate them through that with either signage or kind of natural kind of curating an experience. So that, I think, that translated into their own museum events. I would see that in their own galas that we would host. But then also I think that like curation mindset helped me in my own events when I got to be the leader of a design of how do we really, really, really want people to experience this. That curation element is, I think, what I took most from the museum. Also, just seeing people in a museum space and how inspiring it is for them makes me think constantly about the environment that you're putting people in.
Yeah, I love that. So it's like you're watching them and it's interesting because you can probably see what hooks them and what, like, when they're going through an experience, like, what is the thing that stops everyone? What's the thing that everyone seems to ignore? And that's like a clue of what attracts people. I don't know if you have an example. I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but do you have an example of that in like one of the events, the tech events that you've organized, where it's an experience and it's quite different in that way, in that what hooks people or what kind of catches their interest?
I think one thing that I could talk about would be curating, like allowing for multiple experiences at the same time would be a good example. So like maybe the curators at a museum want you to follow a certain path, but people will kind of take their own approach. Similarly, I think, for example, like planning a conference in a large area, you can't assume that all 500 of your guests or 2,000 of your guests will want the same pathway. And so providing areas like maybe a pop-up swag store, maybe some reclining chairs for quiet time, maybe some like very engaging like self-serve kiosks, like providing different experiences for them to then kind of spread out and help your function space work better, but also to give them option and choice. I think that's kind of what comes to mind.
Yeah. And the booth, like when I went to see your booth in Money 2020 Vegas, I remember that as well. Like there was lots of different, I'll never forget the MacBook that was locked in the box.
Yeah.
And if you got the code, you could get, and the person, I didn't get it, but the person right after me got the MacBook and I was like, oh, just missed it.
So yeah, for booths, we like kind of gamify that experience, right? There's like gamification layered on top of an experience. The thing that you're talking about literally looked like a museum case that I physically made. That's how I described it to my vendor that I had produced that object. For people that have never seen it or listening, it was essentially a plexiglass museum case that you could unlock with keys. And so like the game was that you could pick a key and try to unlock it. Very simple, like carnival game almost, but it looked really like sharp. It looked like we're kind of elevating the object that was in it. That, like you said, a MacBook was in there to motivate folks. So yeah, trying to combine the things that we need to do for events to drive behavior and some of the things that I've seen in the past get people's attention, like the museum, for example.
But importantly as well, that plexiglass kind of box was also kind of in reference to unlock your data, right? Like it was connected to the Middesk. It was connected.
Yeah, exactly. There was a tie into a brand message about what we offered. So yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So for this episode, I'd love to focus on like event strategy. I think you're one of the people that I know that knows the most about this topic. And it's funny because whenever I organize events and conferences, events is always a key topic for fintech marketers. But it can be hard, apart from like just go to X events, there isn't that much more advice around it. So when you hear the phrase event strategy, like how do you think about an event strategy? And also how do you communicate to leaders who might say, you list them, okay, it depends on what we want to do. And they say, okay, we want all of those things. I'm sure we've all had that experience. So how do you think about event strategy and how do you try and put that together for a company?
I think of events as tools to an end. And when I am starting that process, so I'm in my second role now as an event marketer that is starting an event marketing program for the first time. So that's kind of, I think, a blessing because you get to really come in and do your research. So a lot of the exercises that I do right at the beginning might feel quite academic. So I interview stakeholders, like all those leaders that you said, and actually hear what it is that they want results wise, not just revenue, right? Like it actually has to be a specific thing. Let's get in the details. I also will research. I've switched industries a couple times. So I research all of the options. I research people in our competitor space and what they're doing, just to see how we can differentiate or if we need to be doing certain things. And then I kind of start working backwards from those top line company goals. If they say revenue is an important piece of events, like, okay, well, how much revenue does the company need to make? How much is coming from other sources right now? How much do I think I can actually offer the company? I also learn a lot about deal sizes, and I need to know how the company actually makes money so then I can work backwards to understand, okay, how many opportunities might I need to get to that number? That usually ends up taking me about 6 weeks or more to really dig in. And then I will propose usually some sort of a hybrid program that we're looking for coverage in a few different axes, like a graph. On one axis, I'm kind of thinking about location in a sales funnel. So I'm mapping top of funnel to middle of funnel to the conversion point and that late stage deal, and like where are we having the most issues. On another axis, I'm thinking about types of events. So from digital, like a continuum of digital to trade shows to things that might not be very obvious, like speaking engagements at big events, dinners, seminars. There's a huge menu of options there, like what we can be doing and where they might map into that funnel. And then lastly, I'm also thinking about budget. So how much do I have to spend, right? I can do a lot of things if you give me an enormous budget, but what are we realistically looking to invest and where can we then best allocate it? So it's like a 3-dimensional kind of axis in my mind of like mapping in where I think I can have the best impact. And then maybe like one bonus axis is bandwidth. How much can somebody reasonably do? It's not reasonable to ask one person to go to 40 trade shows. So basically looking at all of that and putting it backwards into a puzzle. And then I think there's some mappings that are better suited than others. So even within one event type, you could design programs that drive different results. So I'll give you an example. Paid webinars, like just focusing on webinars. Paid webinars with a large media organization might get you lots of top of funnel awareness. And it might, like we have done them with a large organization in our space. We can get over 1,000 people registered for a 1-hour webinar. And that's great. Or I can, but they're expensive. I can also do short webinars that I host myself that are essentially free and maybe get like 100 to 200 registrations. And those are much more mid-funnel to bottom funnel. And they are much more about establishing ourselves as thought leaders and sprinkling in a little bit about our product. And then I can also do product demo webinars. So that's geared towards like 20 people, very bottom funnel. Again, like cheap. And so each of those, even just within webinars, I can design 3 different programs that have very different outcomes and price point. So that's typically what I'm doing. And then that shifts throughout the year, right? Like I will pitch it and I will explain, hey, each of these events has a kind of purpose and a goal, and we're going to work towards that goal for that event. And they will all sum up to this type of result, and we're going to experiment. And so that's kind of the tool that I use to educate people right at the beginning of like, hey, each of these has a benefit, like a strong suit, and we're going to create a program that tries to hit all of these marks, and then we're going to see what actually resonates with this audience. And then that way I can continually come back to that language when they say, well, how are we doing on this big goal?
Yeah, that's super comprehensive. And would you say, I don't know if you really have this kind of rule of thumb, but like, would you say maybe 50% of the events are top of the funnel, 30% are, I don't know, middle, and then the rest are bottom? Or do you think about it like that? Or how do you decide what goes?
That's a good point. I actually visually will, once I have that, I usually put that all in one large Word document. And then because that's quite overwhelming and it includes justification, I will also do like a Figma board or a visual of any kind where I'm mapping those axes, maybe not the bandwidth and budget, but I kind of am showing in color coordinated, like large trade shows, small trade shows. This is where it is in the funnel. I would say It genuinely depends on what your business needs. Like if you have an amazing top of funnel but everybody gets stuck and doesn't convert at the bottom, then I would only be doing like very account-based marketing, sales dinners, like high touch. I'd say for most companies, if you just want to get started, it's good to just try and do a little bit of everything in the funnel. So I'd do like probably what you said, like 50% at the top, 30%, and then like I lost track of what percentage I just described, so I'm not going to fill in the last number. So I'm only on my first cup of coffee this morning. But yeah, I think trying to do a little bit of a spread across the funnel so you can then see if anything's working, right? And get used to the idea that we're going to be doing events for different purposes. I think that would be valuable.
But I think you've highlighted some like a mismatch that maybe sometimes happens is that leaders are like, we want to do events to bring in new customers, and then they'll only do like booths maybe at trade shows. But if you want revenue, you should be maybe doing more focused on like sales dinners, executive dinners, that kind of thing, which is maybe more bottom of the funnel, closer to revenue. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. And expansion. I like to think of the funnel as like, obviously we convert at that sales moment, and then you're like curating and expanding often. Like in tech, often we have the ability to add new product lines and get customers engaged. And we want that net revenue retention rate to be really high. That's a huge KPI for the business. So even after that conversion point, like what are you going to do to take care of customers and expand them? So yeah, absolutely. It is not all about trade shows are really cool. And we'll talk about it later about how to make them revenue generating. But for most people, like they're like more brand awareness, very, very top of funnel. You might have to do a lot more marketing effort to get them to actually convert into a contract. So not over indexing on one thing is important.
But even we could take like Money 2020 as an example. You could even within Money 2020 have multiple parts of the funnel, right? So you could have a booth, which is more top of the funnel. You could also do a side event, which is like just a general fireside chat, which is maybe more middle. And then you could do like an executive dinner throughout that week, which is bottom, right? And you could have the whole funnel in 1 week. And I imagine that's kind of what people do, right? And you take care of, because it's one of those rare things. What is unique about Money 2020 is that you've got all those people in one place for a week. So go full on, right? Is that how you think about it?
For Money 2020 specifically?
Or big trade shows like
Yeah, I think if you have the luxury of a bit of budget, yes. If you're committing already to something, trying to expand it out a bit incrementally to get different parts of the funnel is great. I totally understand that some people will be able to afford exactly the booth and that is it, or just one of those pieces. But yeah, if you have kind of part of your strategy as like, we're going to go big at this trade show, whatever big means to you, trying to make sure that you have different pieces of the funnel covered, or even within one of those experiences, making sure that you're paying attention to the experience of the different parts of the funnel. What does it mean to be a totally new person being invited to your dinner that's never heard of your brand before? How are you going to do that and convince them versus, hey, like you're our best customer. We really want you at this dinner too. What does that experience look like? And who are they going to talk to? So everything can be kind of subdivided into where people fit in the funnel, and you shouldn't treat them all the same. They don't have the same experience with your brand. They don't know you as well. So yeah, just like taking that extra care. If you're going to spend the money, let's actually dig into the details and make it worthwhile.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll talk about executive dinners in a second because they're very popular now. And I think you're right. They are the fastest way to revenue. But if they've never heard of you before, then it'll be hard to convince them to come to your dinner. So you do need to do the top and the more middle funnel events, because if not, it'll be harder to do the more bottom of the funnel ones, right? Which is an interesting point. So yeah, a lot of companies, every fintech event or marketing event I go to now says events. Events are more important now than ever, especially with AI, because it's more, people want more in-person connection, all that stuff. I think it'd be interesting, as we've said, if you've got a big budget, you can kind of do everything. What's more interesting is if you've got a small budget. And I don't know, I put a random number between 200 and 500,000, which is probably, you'll probably have experience with a lot more. But imagine we've got someone starting with that. and maybe it's a relatively newer company. So they're kind of established, but not super huge. What would you say to them? Would you say start with smaller events so people get to know you, start with dinners? What would you kind of advise them to do?
Yeah. Events are, I feel great about job security right now because AI is making my job faster, but not irrelevant. That trust is that buzzword that everybody is saying because it is harder to trust what you see on the internet right now, at least. So yeah, events are an offering that feel very strong right now. And you're right, like in events for a big company, 200 to 500,000 is not enough money to do all of their goals, but I totally understand that's a huge investment for a smaller company. Like that's a huge budget line. And so I think you can absolutely do you could do 5 different programs with that amount of money that look completely different based on what the company might need. So I'll give you a couple examples, like some different audiences that I've worked with. So say the company has a ton of users. This is an example that I worked with in the past. We had an amazing content engine. We had a ton of newsletter subscribers, like in the 10,000 plus. So we had a lot of audience, but we actually had a product that was pretty much a freemium product, and we weren't getting a lot of revenue from those people. So we took, I don't know, I can't remember now how much it was, but in that neighborhood, 200 to 500. And we just made a summit. Like I had a couple free webinars, and then I did one conference, and I spent it all in 2 days. It was a really bold choice, but it was our goal to really make those relationships, make them absolute raving loyal fans that would pay for the product when we inevitably asked them to start paying more. And we really wanted product adoption on new features. So that's an absolutely valid strategy. Like spend it on one thing and make sure it's the best thing. And you can take a whole year and plan a 2-day conference. Like that's a legitimate use of one person's time. Honestly, more. So that's one way that you could do it. A totally different scenario. So your company leadership maybe says that they want to be everywhere. They want the sales team taking meetings. We need more pipeline. Like that's probably a more common ask. And then I'd maybe take about like 10% of that budget and get yourself an amazing webinar tool. And you're going to do tons of thought leadership now. So you're doing content, but through events. You partner with, if you have a writer or just people internally, and you take a very little bit of money, but you just constantly are producing top of funnel content that's going to get people registered and interested in your brand, right? Like, oh, they have something interesting to say about XYZ. So you kind of establish yourself a little bit more as a content creator. And maybe it's podcasts. That's like what's hot now. It doesn't have to be a webinar, but create digital content. There's absolutely a blurred line now between what events do and what digital content creators do post-COVID and just in our world right now. And then I'd maybe take the rest of that 90% of your budget and get a whole bunch of hospitality events around key industry events. So maybe you can't go to Money 2020 and pay what they're charging for a booth, but you can rent out a coffee shop for a morning and just send all of your salespeople out to book lots and lots of meetings. And you're going to do that for like 6 different events. So if listeners don't know what a hospitality event is, it's essentially just almost like having people over to your house, but it's at a trade show. You're creating an environment that feels really nice. Maybe you have some gifts there. Maybe you have all day coffee. You may or may not have content to anchor it to get people there at certain times, but sometimes it can just be like a lounge. I did that for a company around Dreamforce. We could not afford to be on the floor. And so I booked a really beautiful little room at the Four Seasons, like a little restaurant side room. We had made it into the restaurant or like a relaxation lounge. We had snacks. We actually had therapy dogs come. We just made it a really nice environment to step away from Dreamforce. Like if you're overwhelmed by the floor, come over here. So that's what a hospitality event is. I used to host a lot of them at the museum because we'd be across the street from the convention center. So that was kind of how I learned about them. And so that's, if I had like that type of strategy where I'm going to become a thought leader and then I'm just going to go out and do lots and lots of little events, that's another totally valid strategy that is not anything like the first one that I talked about, which is like hosting a conference. So I hate to say like it depends, but I think like try to analyze, if you're in that position of like getting a budget and needing to decide, try to analyze what is the most important thing for the company and try to anchor on that and work backwards from the goal. Events can almost do anything. So just doing them to do them is not helpful. It only has to be about that goal.
Now, these are some really great examples. And I think the second one especially is a really good framework or template for maybe a company that's just getting into events. I think that's a really good way to start. And one other thing that I have found, and I don't know if you'd agree with me, is that especially if you're not well known, doing your own events is probably one of the best like ways to get an ROI out of events. Like if you just pay for booths, but no one's heard of you, it can be harder to make the most of them. But when you're the host of your own events and you do the work of inviting and making it a good event, it also puts you a bit on a pedestal, right? Because like, oh, you organized the event. So it helps kind of grow your reputation. You're seen as more legitimate. There's more credibility. Would you agree with that? Like doing your own events is a good way to like position yourself in the market.
Yeah, you have to do them well. But yes,
yeah, that's true.
I think, yeah, absolutely. So I think you can get, like the best compliment I think I ever got was just people coming to that conference that I planned, right? Like that first scenario was something that I've done. And people coming from all sorts of really big companies and saying, this is the best event I've ever been to. And you're really punching above your weight. That's like the best compliment. Because I was one event planner and absolutely did not work alone. I had a whole marketing team that was like helping and supporting. But, you know, in terms of, we didn't have an agency running it for us, like in terms of the details and experience, that was like my purview. And so punching above your weight essentially is what you were just talking about. Like if you can kind of, you don't have to be a massive company to host a really great evening for people. So yeah, I agree that you can really impress people through this channel in a way that maybe written content can't do right now.
Yep, totally. What are some details? Can you share some examples of those details that you think made that event or make your events like that much more professional or better than someone who's just kind of slap something together or whatever? Like what do you think makes it that much more special?
Create content that is not paid. I think that is a huge piece.
What do you mean by that? Is that like not have sponsors basically?
Yeah, no sponsored content.
Oh,
I totally get the financial model of why really big shows put people into paid speaking positions, like essentially a sponsorship to get on stage. And I've absolutely paid for those sometimes. I think the events that I planned that got such great feedback, we didn't do that at all. You were not allowed to pay to get on stage. We're very, very rigorous about vetting those people and working with them to make sure the stage content was amazing. So that was one really big piece. I think a design element that really people resonated with, even if they didn't explicitly know this is why they were happy, is that we designed the schedule throughout the day to have much longer breaks between content. So we'd have like a pod of content, like 3 30-minute sessions, so quick and snappy, and then a 45-minute break for them to get coffee and like genuinely meet each other and talk. So I think even just how do you want to be spending your day? It's overwhelming to leave your house and go and be with strangers for 2 days, like taking care of people. Even little things like really caring about dietary restrictions, kind of boring, but making people feel safe that they're going to be able to eat something, and like personally emailing them like, hey, I saw that you put that on your form. I'm making sure that you have an option. Here's my number in case you need it on site. Or we would have like a little kiosk that was filled with things like medical supplies and feminine products. And we had little kind of tactile toys that people will fidget with, and earplugs if you felt overwhelmed. We also had a room for you to like go and have a maternity room, a nursing room. So just like making people feel like comfortable and not like they have to retreat back to a hotel room if they need to be comfortable. It goes a super long way. And then last, having what people want to drink and eat. So you'd be surprised when you start planning events how expensive coffee stations are. Much less like iced coffee stations is even more expensive. So like spending a good bit of money on making sure that people have access to whatever it is that they need and they're not just kind of like standing there hungry or they need an extra coffee but they can't find one. So little details like that make it very human and able for them to go enjoy the content.
Yeah, I love all those tips. For me, one thing that I really appreciate when I go to an event is like actually good food, tasty food, not just like wrapped packed sandwiches or pizza from the place next door, like actually quite nice. That, I don't know, it's such a small thing, maybe because I'm Spanish and I love like good food, but really like they put effort into this. They care. Like, yeah, that makes an impact.
I mean, it takes budget to have good food. So that's why I said that one scenario, like maybe you spend all of your money on one thing, right? Like maybe you want it to be good. So are you gonna like put half your budget to it or the whole budget to it?
And one other thing I really appreciate, and I've tried to do this with my own events, is also an organizer that tries to do a different format, because it's easy to do a fireside chat and panel, like that's what we all like and do and everything. But something like breakout, like we did this one year where instead of a fireside chat, or we did a fireside chat and then afterwards we put people on tables and they had to just discuss for like 20 minutes and then people would share takeaways, like changing things out a bit and making it more interactive. This is something I'm still trying to work on and improve. But an organizer that is like confident enough to play around with the format, like that's brave, I think, because it can also fail. But even if they try, I'm like impressed, because that's brave and tough, I think, and can make a big difference when done well.
People are looking for something different. At this point, you can't just slap something together and be like, oh, well, this is kind of the format that everybody does. Like, yeah, everybody's doing it. Like, you have to try to make it more engaging. Even if it's like at a trade show, we did a sponsored lunch where it was going to be a workshop. And we made sure that people knew that if they came, they were going to get like a special worksheet that we were going to work through together. I know that sounds really silly, but just even having the effort of like our graphic designer and our content person like work together on something that they can take away, that they can write on, and that would be part of the activity. I know that sounds so simple, but a lot of people don't put that much effort in because it takes a few hours before the event to really plan it out. So it's about caring in advance and then like just delivering what you promise.
Yeah, no, totally. One other thing I wanted to talk about is executive dinners, because these are all the rage now. Have you done a lot of these, and what have you found works best here? Because I think the biggest challenge probably the organizers face here is, getting the executive in the room. And when they cancel last minute and say, no, can I send this person instead? And you're like, well, not really. How have you managed those? And what is your tip for like getting the people that matter in the room?
That's a great segue from what we were just talking about. You can't do what everybody is doing. For me, you have to have an executive there or a few. You just can't be like, oh, come meet our sales dude. Like, sales guys are awesome and they deserve just as much conversation as your executive, but you need anchors there, like human anchors that are going to pull people. So that's one little thing. If you're trying to do sales dinners without your executives there and excited about it, it's not going to work. For me, it goes a little bit back to that museum comment I had earlier. Finding a venue that is unique, right? Can you take them somewhere that maybe they can't get a reservation at normally? Or can you do something where like the chef is a draw, like you're kind of giving them an experience of some kind? Listen, I'm an event person and I really would love to be cuddled up on the couch with my partner, like at the end of the night. And so in order to get people to come out and like get childcare or whatever it is, negotiate that, you really have to give them something that is going to provide them a bit of value. So for example, either content or talking to that executive, like getting FaceTime, and is going to be like an interesting activity for them. People have all sorts of activities that are available to them. And so unless you're going to provide something a little bit more special or thoughtful, they just don't want to do it. The good news is you'd be really surprised. Like there are many Michelin star or like very kind of like hot restaurants that are maybe very hard to get a reservation at that are ready and willing to take your private room reservation. It's actually quite a bit easier to get into those really nice restaurants than you'd think. So I'd start there. We've also done like private chefs in an apartment, which works really well. Like, hey, this is kind of a culinary experience. You get to watch the chef make the food. And then beyond draw, you just have to oversell it. Like, people are going to get busy. These are obviously not paid events, so they're not financially on the hook for coming. This is actually an old music thing. My clarinet teacher, when he was telling me how to get people to come to my clarinet recital, he'd say, you have to invite 10 people for one person to come.
Oh, wow.
I don't think it's quite that bad at these dinners, but it's close. I mean, it's maybe halfway. You really have to just say, like, we can't invite 10 people and think that 10 people are going to come. It has to be like, we have a list of 100 people and we want 15, 20 people to come and like 30 RSVPs. And then you have to just have a thick skin right at the beginning of the event that like, yep, we're pulling the chairs if they don't show up. Like, some people are just not going to make it, and that's okay. I've had to do that too, like where I've gotten sick and I have to cancel last minute on.
Yeah,
so
totally. It happens.
always overbook and try and make it very interesting.
And maybe one idea is also to start with a lunch instead of a dinner. It's a little bit less
I love
commitment.
breakfast and lunches. Yeah. It does not need to be dinner. Dinner is a big ask, actually.
It is actually a big ask,
I think leaving the office is much more interesting than staying late out at night. So yeah, if you can do something else creative, again, great idea.
Start with breakfast and lunch and then go from there. The other thing I wanted to ask about is you have a lot of an interesting blog post on your website about like booths. Like, I have so many questions here, but just for the sake of time, I'm going to pick one, which is when you have a booth, you had this in your article, you said about how you have like this kind of dream team for the booth. I think that's what it was about. So you have like your hook, you have your partnerships, you have your sales. So could you talk a bit more about that? Like, who are the people at the booth and what are the different roles that they play? What have you seen kind of work there?
Yeah, I think of a booth as really bringing, well, any event is just bringing the brand of your company to life. And when I go to a big trade show and I have the luxury of bringing more than like 2 or 3 people, I bring a couple sellers, an executive, usually my head of marketing, a partnerships person, and an account manager or sales engineer, sometimes both, a solutions engineer, sometimes both, and then a couple of their random people, sometimes like a head of product or a product leader that has been building something newer. The idea is that when people come to our booth and interact with us, I want to be able to answer every question possible about strategy, about why something was broken and now it's fixed, about how our pricing model works. Literally, I want the entire team to be there and represented. I also think it's not a fun experience to walk up to a trade show booth and just talk to 2 guys that are selling it. I see that so much. They're not the only people that can sell the product convincingly. The people that made the product are really interesting to talk to, and they're really curious. They have awesome questions for the folks that walk up. Or it's really good for the CEO to come up and hear, like, take sales meetings and hear what people are asking for. Like, that's super valuable information for us too. And so that's how I design the teams. If it's not just a teeny tiny trade show where I'm sending maybe like a marketer and 1 seller and 1 account manager, it's going to be like that full suite. So people really experience the company. And what really happens is then we have a very good idea about if there's a true opportunity there. We don't just get like, well, we scanned all these badges. We like really had a deep conversation with them and we're ready to talk about like, hey, this next meeting is going to be about this product because of this problem. So that's a really valuable strategy for us.
Yep, that makes total sense. And my last question is, you have this tip on your website that the best type of swag is swag that they need, the person needs. What's your favorite example of swag that people need and one that you've offered to people?
Yeah, swag does not always have to have your logo on it. It can be just like that human element I was talking about, designing what are people going to need in that moment. I think my favorite maybe is when I was in Miami, we brought sunscreen
Oh, nice. Yes.
And lip balm. And we didn't buy, you can get really cheap sunscreen with your logo on it. I don't even know what that sunscreen's ingredients are. We got like Sunbum and brand names that people recognize, and they really want to pick it up. They're like, ooh, yeah, I use that product, or I'm willing to put that on my face. So for us, it's about even just thinking about the environment that you'll be going into and what will people that are visiting there need. It's all about that hospitality mindset. Like, I am hosting them, even if it is for a few moments at my booth. And people genuinely just get a better impression of you because they think, oh, they're smart. Like, they've thought about it.
Exactly. It's like clear that you understand them because you've put yourself in their position, thought what they want.
Yeah, it can be as simple as just little toiletries that they need, but it demonstrates like a care.
Yep. I love it. Amazing. Well, thanks so much, Kate. This has been super interesting and very comprehensive, so I really appreciate it. And yeah, thanks so much for coming on.
You're welcome. Thanks, Araminta.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Thanks for listening. You can find show notes and information about guests at www.mintcopywritingstudios.com/podcast. And finally, huge thanks to orama.tv for producing this podcast. Thanks for listening, and see you at the next episode.